Hi everyone, here is your trigonometry review. So starting off, remember you always start at your reference angle, which is simply the one that you're given or looking for. And you label your opposite, which is always opposite the angle. Then I label my hypotenuse, which is always opposite the right angle. And finally I label the adjacent, which always touches the angle in addition to the hypotenuse. In this circumstance, x and 10 are labeled, whereas O is not. So I got some movement on the camera here right now. So that means I would get rid of that. Remember, everything here is about SOHCAHTOA. Okay, so SOHCAHTOA. Remember that. This is A and H, so it's the cosine function. So I write cosine. Remember, the angle always comes after the trig word, and then that equals the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So I put x over 10 because it goes in order of adjacent over hypotenuse. Because x is on the top, remember this is where we will multiply. So x will equal cosine of 51 times 10. And that's going to be something that you type into your calculator in the classroom. But as a reminder, it's the trig button, and you would type it in just like this. Moving on to the next example. Again, I start at my reference angle. Opposite that. Hypotenuse is opposite the right angle, and adjacent is the other one that touches the angle. So this again is a cosine, just happens to be. So cosine of 30 degrees is equal to, I got a lot of movement, I'm sorry. Cosine of 30 is equal to x over 14. And then from there, I'm going to multiply again because x is still on the top. So this is cosine of 30 times 14 equals x. Remember, those parentheses need to be there when you type it in. They will automatically come up. You have to make sure you close them appropriately. Number 3, again, my reference angle is here. This is opposite, this is adjacent, and this is hypotenuse. So just so happens that this is cosine again, because again, it's adjacent and hypotenuse. So cosine of 70 is equal to x over 17. And again, because x is on top, this will end up being a multiplication problem, and we're typing that in. All right, moving on to the next one. 56 is my reference angle. This is opposite, this is the hypotenuse, and that is the adjacent. In this case, the hypotenuse is the one I don't want, so that means this is a tangent function. I put my reference angle in there as 56 degrees is equal to the opposite over the adjacent, so that's going to be x over 15. So it will still be a multiplication because x is on top. So tangent of 56 times 15 equals x. Number 5, I have my angle. This is the opposite. This is the hypotenuse, leaving that to be the adjacent, which is also the one that is not labeled. Because that is not labeled, it's going to be sine, because for, again, so I lost it on the video, so I'm just rewriting it here. Remember, SOHCAHTOA, OH is sine. So sine of 16 is equal to 18 over x. So now this is the first one on this review that we've had where x is on the bottom. Remember, when this happens, it's division, but it must be done in a specific order, which is always going to be starting with that number. So 18 divided by the sine of 16 will equal x. And again, you're just typing that in, just this time instead of multiplying, you're dividing. Whatever number is up top will always be the number you start with, every single time. The trig function will always be what you divide by. All right, this one, it looks kind of weird, but remember the 90-degree angle is there, so this is your hypotenuse. Your 73 is here, therefore that's your opposite, and then making x your adjacent. So this is an opposite and adjacent, so it's a tangent function, so tangent of 73. And then the opposite is 12, the adjacent is x, so it's 12 over x. Again, because x is on the bottom, I know that I'm going to divide. And I would type that into the calculator. Notice again that it's 12 divided by the tangent of 73. That will happen every time. Okay, so now I'm going to move a little bit faster because we've been doing these going pretty slowly, but now I'm going a little bit faster here. So adjacent is the one I don't need on this one. That's the opposite. That's the hypotenuse. So this is sine of 54 equals 20 over x. Again, because x is on the bottom, it means I will divide. So I have 20 over the sine of 54. And from there, I know that I'm going to hit the button in the calculator, remembering to put that one in first. Last one here, opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent is this teeny tiny one right there. So again, a sine function, so sine 75 equals opposite over hypotenuse, so 16 over x, meaning I will divide. All of these buttons again are under the trig button on the calculator. When you're missing the angle, you're going to be doing the same thing. You're still going to start with the angle itself, labeling opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. In this case, I know it's going to be sine. I put an x for the angle, and then I still write the ratio, which is 18 over 29 in this case. When I want to undo the function, when I try to get sine by itself, this is where I'll do the inverse of sine. And you type it in exactly as it's written right now. So the inverse of sine of 18 over 29, and then that equals x. So whatever the calculator tells you, remember, you just type that part into the calculator. You don't type in the equals x part. Moving on to 10, this is the opposite, this is the adjacent, and this is the hypotenuse. So this is a tangent. So again, tangent of x equals, the opposite is 16 over the adjacent of 23, and you will be using the inverse button in the calculator, typing that fraction in. So again, you would write over 16 over 23 inside of that. Moving on to 11, the opposite. The hypotenuse is across from the right angle, and then the adjacent is next to. So this would be a cosine function. So cosine of x equals the adjacent over the hypotenuse, so 29 over 38. And we will use the inverse once again because we are trying to find the angle. And number 12, here's my angle that I'm looking for, opposite, hypotenuse, adjacent. The opposite is not labeled, therefore this is cosine. So cosine of x equals 29 over 42. And again, you saw a pattern at this point, but we use that inverse button anytime we're looking for the angle. Okay, so that's all the basics. And now we get into a whole lot of word problems. Okay, first things first, and I'm just gonna set these up because I just went through the whole idea of how to solve them. So I'm just gonna set these ones up, but once they're set up, they work the same way as the entire front. The accompanying diagram shows a ramp 30 feet long leaning against a wall at a construction site. If the ramp forms an angle of 32 as it's shown, how high above the ground to the nearest tenth is the top of the ramp? So it's asking for the height. That's the part that you have to be able to figure out from reading this. So now we label just as we have been, opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. The adjacent is not relevant in this current circumstance. So this is a sine question. So sine of 32 equals x over 30, and we'll multiply to solve, making sure we round to the nearest tenth, which will be this decimal place. So whatever, let's say you have a 5 here, it will round whatever is there up to a next number. And if that is a 4, it will keep whatever that number is right where it is. 14, a 20-foot support post leans against a wall, making a 70-degree angle with the ground. So I have a support post of some sort leaning against a wall, and it makes a 70-degree angle with the ground. The post itself, leaning against the wall, is 20 feet. So this is what my picture should look like after reading that first sentence. It wants to know how far up the wall it's going to support. So I already know that this is going to be sine because it's the same circumstances over here, just with different numbers. But again, you would label your opposite, your hypotenuse, and adjacent to determine that. So sine of 70 is equal to x over 20, and I would multiply to solve, again, paying attention to nearest tenth. If a tree 28 meters tall casts a shadow 32 meters long. So let's stop right there. We have a tree and a shadow. Remember, shadows are on the ground, okay? The tree is 28 meters tall. The shadow is 32 meters long. We're envisioning the sun's rays creating that right triangle for us. What is the angle of elevation of the sun to the nearest degree? So somebody here, maybe an ant on the ground, whoever, something here is looking up to the sun from this circumstance. So that's where your angle of elevation part is coming from. Remember, your angle of elevation is down here looking up. Your angle of depression, as a reminder, is the alternate interior from the horizon going down. So again, I would label my opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. This would be a tangent function. Opposite is 28, adjacent is 32, and we'd be using the inverse button for that one because x is the angle. I'm sorry for all the jumping with this camera right now. It's very bouncy. A person measures the angle of depression from the top of a wall to a point on the ground. Okay, here we go. Wall, point on the ground, angle of depression looks like that. It goes from the horizon down. That's important to be able to label. So, measures the angle of depression. The point is located on level ground 62 feet from the base of the wall. The angle of depression is 52. How high is the wall to the nearest tenth of a foot? So that's what I'm looking for. I label as I go. Remember, the angle of elevation and angle of depression are equal because of alternate interior angles. So now I'm into this triangle. I have my opposite, my adjacent, not my hypotenuse. So this is again a tangent of 52 equals x over 62 because it's opposite over adjacent. And I'm multiplying. These last two are going to be ones where you need to do 2 and subtract. So we have our diagram. It's all labeled for us, and it wants us to find AB. Okay. Notice that AB is not a part of a right triangle. So what we're going to do is we're going to solve for this small triangle. It's actually there for us already. So we're going to use that small triangle to solve for CD first. That's the first piece of information we're going to need. Once we have that, we can use it to find for the entire length of AC in this larger triangle. So here we go. We would first do opposite and adjacent. So tangent equals, tangent of 27 equals 9 over x. You're going to divide for that one. Remember, 9 divided by that. From here, you're going to use that value to find this entire length. So now this is the opposite, this is the adjacent, so it's tangent again. Now it's of this entire angle, which is 57 degrees, okay? And that's going to equal the opposite, which we'll call y, we don't know what that is yet, okay? Over whatever the number was you got from here. Okay, so that number would go right there. It would be a multiplication again. And then from there, you would simply subtract 9 from whatever you got for your answer because you're just looking for this portion A, B. 9 is already there. Okay. A much more common type of problem is one like this where you have the ship. We have this really long right triangle, which is the ship all the way to the lighthouse. And then we have this smaller right triangle here. Okay. In both cases, it looks like we're going to be, after reading through the whole thing, knowing that we're going to round to the nearest foot, paying attention to all of that, we're looking for A to D. So this is what we're trying to get to at the very end. But to do that, we're going to find this distance from D to C and this entire distance from A to C. I'll call that A. So you're going to set up tangent twice. Tangent of 7 and also tangent of 16. Both of them are going to have an opposite of 125. That's the lighthouse. The adjacent with tangent of 7 is what I called A. The adjacent with the 16 degrees is what I called Y. Once you find both of those through division, 125 divided by that, you will subtract those two and get your final answer. So that is your trig review. Have a good day.